Thank you for joining me back here for another video. Today, actually, let's start with last week. Last week we talked about the second day of creation. We talked about the formation of the a life-supporting, oxygen-rich atmosphere, which the Torah places on the second day of creation. Scientists place that in the Proterozoic Aeon. But I should tell you, though, that I left out a detail that's, it wasn't really relevant until now, so I just kind of left it out. I do that from time to time. If it's not relevant at the moment, I just want to, let's put that off for a little bit so that you can sort of process what I have to say. And that tiny little detail is this week we're getting into day 3 of creation. That tiny little detail that I left out is that day 3 really began during the Torah's day 1. And it just sort of builds up until we reach that point. Now, it's not technically a problem as far as the text is concerned. It's not like it's a contradiction or anything, because the Torah frequently talks about things being completed or being made at the time of their completion, at the time of their, not completed, created or made, at the time of their completion, at the time of their, that it becomes finished. So, for example, Adam and Eve, it mentions that God took from, I'm not going to use that one. Because we're going to get into that here within the next couple of weeks. But Torah doesn't begin by telling us about the Big Bang. No, it starts sometime after the Big Bang, because Big Bang is really not relevant to the completion of this light creation, this formation of the earth and the sun, until it actually is fully completed. And so that's what the Torah is doing here. Now, since the third day of creation wasn't completed until seed-bearing plants came onto the scene, okay, so it can start, whenever. It can start on the first day of creation, the Torah's first day of creation. And it's not officially the third day, until it's completed, until, in this case, seed-bearing plants, are born. I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but you know what? That's okay. So let's talk about it. Let's just jump right into it. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 1 because we haven't made it very far yet. We're going to be in verses 9 through 13. Again, I'm going to read this in Hebrew. I'm going to translate it, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit. And I do have my notes because there happens to be botany involved today, and that's not really my strong suit either. So I am relying on just other things that I've learned along the way. Again, informing my understanding of the Torah with science, with things that we know to be true, things that we know to be, confirmable, verifiable. There we go, verifiable, or falsifiable, whatever the case may be. Now, jumping right in, verse 9 of chapter 1 of the book of Genesis says, "Vayomer Elohim yiqawu hamayim mitahat hashamayim el makom echad v'thira'eh hayavasha v'hi chen v'yiqra Elohim layavasha eres ulamiqwe hamayim qara yamim v'yar Elohim kitov Vayomer Elohim tadsheh ha'aretz desha esev mizerah מזריע, זרע, עץ, פרי עץ, עושה, פרי למינו, אשר זרעו בו, על הארץ ויחן, ותוצא הארץ דשא, עשב, מזריע, זרע למיניהו, ועץ עושה פרי אשר זרעו בו למיניהו. וירא אלוהים כי טוב, ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום שלישי. Which is to say, it's been kind of a long day, so my reading's a little bit off today, but that's all right. Plus, I think I actually have, I've got something on my glasses that kind of, the vowels in Hebrew are like dots and dashes, and so they're kind of difficult sometimes to read if you got stuff on your glasses. So, translating it, it says that God said, let the waters beneath the sky or beneath the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let dry land appear. Yavasha is dry land. And it was so. And God called the dry land Eretz. He called it earth. And to the gathering of waters, he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, sprout grasses, if you will. I lost my place. Grasses and plants yielding seeds. Fruit trees. It's fruit trees that produce fruit, each according to its kind, that has the seed, that has its seed inside of it on the earth, and it was so. So God's saying, let these different types of plants come forth. The chief of which is seed-producing plants, fruit trees, if you will. And the earth brought forth these plants, these vegetation plants with seed after its kind, and fruit-bearing trees, each with a seed in it after its kind. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning, a third day. So at some point, I don't know why, I just took off my glasses. I know good and well that I'm going to get back to reading stuff in my notes here. So at some point in the Archean Aeon, this is the first day, the Torah's first day of creation. So at some point in all of that, God began to form the first major landmass on planet Earth, right? So these massive windstorms and oceanic currents, that swept across the planet, they combined with seismic, volcanic, and tectonic activity, and brought forth the first landmass or land masses, whatever the case may be. I don't know. I wasn't there. Brought it up presumably from the bottom of the ocean, because it probably wouldn't be in the middle of it, to the surface of the water. So in a way, I suppose it's technically not wrong. The ancients were probably not technically wrong when they envisioned the land sort of floating on the primordial sea. They just weren't necessarily correct. If you understand it to be a poetic description of the scientific reality rather than a little one, okay. If not, okay, so they got it wrong. Oh no, this is thousands of years ago. How could they possibly get something like that wrong, given that we only just recently discovered this? Now, the landmasses would go through several different forms, obviously, before reaching their current form. We've all heard of Pangaea, and all these other different. I think Pangaea is the most popular one. So we've all heard of all of these supercontinents in the past that existed. Probably one of my favorite ones was where you had Antarctica and Australia were basically joined at one point. And that's just funny to me because, like we all know, Antarctica is at the bottom of the planet, right? Australia is not too far away from there, but they used to be much further north. So there's that. That's interesting. Now, some land masses would separate from each other or collide with each other due to the tectonic activity. Some portions would be submerged completely and new land masses would rise from the seas, which is funny because I kind of just said that without actually saying that. Now, obviously, this didn't all happen overnight, right? I mean, this isn't like some ridiculous global cataclysm just happens and suddenly, boom, you've got land in places where it wasn't just yesterday. No, this all took quite a lot of time. It took a very long time. We're talking billions of years type long time, right? Now, despite what some people are going to tell you, the fact that God spent so much time forming the world rather than just taking a literal week of literal 24-hour days to do it, shows us the love that he put into it and his overwhelming patience. And these are things that humanity would only begin to understand at the beginning of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Right? So the very first plant life on earth, now that we've talked about the formation of land, land gathering together, rising up from the ocean, all the waters just sort of gathered into one place. The first plant life on Earth, we get to move on to plants, was aquatic. And all terrestrial plants, that's plants that are on the Earth, on the land, descend from aquatic plant life. So around 430 million years ago, during the Silurian period of the Paleozoic era, it just makes me sound smart. I don't know if it actually makes me smart, but it makes me sound smart to say that. The Silurian period. Yes. So around 430 million years ago, algae living in shallow fresh water evolved a few features that allowed it to quite literally take root on land. First land plants, they really sort of looked like mosses, liverworts, hornworts. I'm not really sure how those plants got the word wart in their name, but I mean, I suppose it is what it is. I should just sort of accept it, but I think they got, the short end of that stick. Right, so these primordial plants, they really were, just kind of bleh. They were non-vascular, which meant that they stayed relatively small. We're talking like lichens, mosses, that sort of thing. And they only lived in moist areas, like lichens, mosses, that sort of thing. That sounds familiar. They also reproduced by spreading spores, not seeds, which is only important here because the Torah specifically mentions seed-bearing plants were created on the third day of creation. Now, they were homosporous, which does not mean what you would think it means. I'm just going to throw that out there. It means that they only produced one type of spore, and they used that to reproduce. Basically, the primordial, these early plants, the very first generations of plants on Earth, were really quite unimpressive. Now, in the late Devonian period, so this is sometime later, some terrestrial plants began to evolve to be heterosporous, which does not mean what you think it might mean. But unless, of course, you think that it means that it produces two types of spores, because it does. The microspores, which are male, I don't know how they gendered them, the male microspores and female megaspores. I don't know how they decided what their gender was. That sounds like the sort of thing that really the the modern left in the West should handle, maybe look into. Maybe we could rename a few things. I don't know. That seems to be all they're good for lately. Now, eventually, some of the heterosporous plants began to retain a single megaspore. This is the female part of the plant, or the female spore, I should say, within the parent plant in the nucellus, where one or more protective layers would cover it, but leave a small opening for pollen to enter this ovule. Now, if that all went over your head, it's okay, because it did me too. And I researched it. I was just, how does this work? And I'm reading it all, and I'm like, wow, this would be so much easier if, I had a background in botany. I don't. So it's, yeah. Ovule, though, is very clearly taken from the Latin word for egg, or in this case, seed. Now, once fertilized, the ovule matures into a seed. Boom, there it is, the seed. Now that gives it a major evolutionary advantage over other spore-producing plants. The seed versus the spore. One very obvious advantage is seeds last a lot longer. They can be dried out a little bit and then, planted, and they do just fine. Whereas a spore, once it's dry, it's dead. Seeds allowed for dormancy, dispersal, and survival in dry or variable conditions, which is what led to the spread of seed-bearing plants into areas that spore-producing plants couldn't access because the air and soil were too dry. Among the earliest seed-bearing plants were gymnosperms. I'm not exactly sure how if I said that correctly. Please don't hold that against me. But these are plants like conifers, which means that conifers, which are trees like pine, fir, and spruce, evergreen trees, that sort of a thing, it means that they are among the oldest of seed-bearing plants. So you see, who said botany was not cool, right? I mean, most of us did, but who says now that it's not cool? Again, most of us. Sorry if there are any botanists watching this. Maybe give them cool names, like instead of ovule, maybe like Skippy. Now, angiosperms, which are, it's a really cool word, right? Angiosperms are nothing more than the flower-producing plants, right? They also have seeds. And that's going to include most species of fruit, whether a tree or, just like a shrub. So those evolved later on in the Carboniferous period. I forgot where I was going there for a second. Those evolved later on in the Carboniferous period, which, as the name implies, resulted in an explosion of carbon-based life. It's very cool stuff, and in a late-night documentary sort of way. I happen to have enjoyed learning a lot about this stuff, and there's a lot that I really didn't include because a lot of it's really just not totally relevant, unless you happen to be a botanist, unless you happen to, understand all the science and everything that goes into this sort of thing, at which point, then we could talk about it. But most people just aren't there, and that's fine. This is just a, kind of very basic introduction to the idea, and I'm going to let you just sort of look into it all on your own. So we could see here that there was a period of speciation of plant life. Where you've got these aquatic plants that sort of took root quite literally on land, produced spores. Eventually, those spores evolved into a point where these plants were producing a male and a female spore. Then it retained the female spore within itself, which eventually formed into the seed after fertilization. And that gives us modern seed plants. Those flowering plants, the angiosperms, would eventually evolve, to where they would be flowering, and that would help to spread the pollen a little bit better and ultimately help to spread the plants around the world. It's just the way it works for some reason. And that is what comprises the Torah's third day, right? Now, that being said, I'm done. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button, turn your notifications on. Find me on Facebook, An Unorthodox Jew. All you have to do is search for it, and I should come up. And then, after that, send me a message, say howdy, let's talk. Obviously share this video if you enjoyed this video. Share any of my older videos if you enjoyed it. That being said, I'm done, and I'll sign off for now. Relatively short video this week, that's cool. So I'll go ahead and sign off for now. So until next time, shalom.